أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بل قالوا إنا وجدنا آباءنا على أمة وإنا على آثارهم مهتدون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. We have religion and we have culture. These are two very different things. Religion is different from culture. Religion is from Allah Azza wa Jal. Religion is purified. It's pure. It's divine. The laws come straight from Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah is the best of lawmakers. Culture, on the other hand, is man-made. It's not pure. It's not divine. It can have flaws. It can have mistakes. Religion has no flaws. Religion is perfect. Culture can have flaws, can have mistakes. Some cultural habits may not make sense. Some of them might not be logical. And hence we see that some cultural habits change over time. A group of people used to have certain cultural habits. After a while they abandoned these habits and they picked up new habits. They change. Why? Because they can be flawed. We have some practices that are both religious and cultural. They're supported by both. For example, having a guest at home, feeding your guest, taking care of your guest. This is a value that is both religious and cultural, to take care of a guest. Offering your condolences to a person who has lost a loved one, who has a deceased, comforting them for the loss of a loved one. This is both cultural and religious. Cooking, feeding people, offering people food. This exists in certain cultures, and it certainly is supported by religion. Respecting elders. This is a value both cultural and religious. If an elder enters the majlis and needs a place to sit, we offer them our seat, we offer them a chair. This is both religious and cultural. Visiting the sick, for example. Visiting the sick. This is both cultural and religious. Sometimes people cannot differentiate between what is religious and what is cultural. They mix the two. What they think is religious actually turns out to be cultural. For example, and they take offense, and in fact they blame religion for this practice, thinking that it is religious, but it is actually cultural. For example, in some cultures, females are prevented from education. They're not allowed to go to school, grade school. I know previously in Iraq, specifically in Karbala, women were not allowed to go to school. And instead, they would go to a female scholar, or known as mullaya, and she would teach them how to recite Quran, teach them how to recite Mafatih al-Jinan, and that's it. As if that the only thing that a female needs to learn is reciting Quran and reciting Mafatih al-Jinan and a couple of laws and ahkam from here and there. That's it. A lot of these women, they grew up thinking that this is religious. This is a religious practice. Religion promotes ignorance for females, and education for males. Well, this has nothing to do with religion. This is purely cultural. Purely cultural. This has nothing to do with religion. When we come to religion, we see that the hadith says by Rasulullah, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ فَرِيضَةٌ عَلَى كُلِّ مُسْلِمٍ وَمُسْلِمَةٍ. That seeking knowledge is mandatory upon all, men and women, Muslims. Not just some. اطلب العلم ولو في الصين. Seek knowledge even if it's in China. China was the farthest point that anyone could imagine going. Hadith says, go and seek knowledge even if it's in the farthest point that you can reach. Sometimes it's the opposite. What is deemed to be cultural is actually religious. Some people, they can't tell the difference between culture and religion. If they haven't studied, if you don't have tafaqquh fi deen, if you don't have ma'rifah in religion and in deen, you will not be able to differentiate between what is religious and what is cultural. For example, when a husband dies, the wife, in order to remarry someone else, she has to wait for how long? 4 months and 10 days. This is called iddah. Some think that this is cultural, that it is part of the cultural norm for a wife to abstain from remarrying for a certain period, for 4 months and 10 days, until she may marry again. No, this is not cultural. It might have been cultural in the past for the Arab during the days of Jahiliyyah, but it is certainly religious. And this law is found in the Quran. وَالَّذِينَ يُتَوَفَّوْنَ مِنْكُمْ وَيَذَرُونَ أَزْوَاجًا يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ أَرْبَعَةَ أَشْهُرٍ وَعَشْرًا. Those who their husbands pass away and they remain, they have to wait for 4 months and 10 days in order to remarry. Now the question is, what do you do? So sometimes religion and culture, they are compatible. Some laws, as we saw, some habits, some norms are both cultural and religious. What happens when they clash? When religion clashes with culture? When religion says something and culture says something else? What do we do? Which one do we choose? Which one do we abide by? Let me give you an example. New Year celebrations, in some cultures, they involve paganistic rituals, walking on fire, playing music, certain celebrations that are not Islamic. Listening to music, having pagan rituals, this is not Islamic. But it is embedded in some cultures. That is the way they celebrate the New Year's. And by the way, we have the Persian New Year coming up very, very soon. It will coincide. It will be on Thursday, which will coincide with the second Laylatul Qadr and the Shahada of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Here, some people will be torn apart. Do they commemorate the Shahada of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, or do they celebrate their New Year? And you can't have both, because some of these practices, they contradict each other. So what do you do? Which one do you favor? There are some, they favor culture over religion. They take from religion as long as it does not contradict their culture. The day that it contradicts their culture, they will abandon faith and religion, unfortunately. While it should be the other way around. While religion should be the balance and should be the basis. It should be the judge. We take from culture what conforms to religion. Not that we take from religion what conforms to culture. Tonight, my dear brothers and sisters, we will discuss some un-Islamic cultural practices, un-Islamic cultural habits and norms that we have. There are some habits that are embedded in our cultures. Not a specific culture. I will not target a specific culture, but my lecture is general for all times and all cultures. And I will only mention some, otherwise we can give an entire series of how certain cultural habits and norms conflict with religion. Today we will only introduce some, so that the listener will know that there are sometimes contradictions and conflicts between cultural norms and religion, and what do we do in this case? Number one, in several cultures, mixing with cousins is completely allowed. Your cousin is like your sibling. If you have a female cousin, you consider her like your sister. And hence, she does not wear hijab from you. They sit together, they joke, maybe they even shake hands. They sit right next to each other as if they are siblings. This exists in many cultures, where cousins are treated like siblings, like brothers and sisters. Or you're a female, you have a male cousin. You don't wear hijab from him. You shake hands. Maybe you embrace, you hug as if he's your brother. This is purely cultural. This is purely cultural. This exists in several cultures. And I hear some youth, they say, oh, she's my cousin. She's like my sister. Yes, like. She's not your sister. She's not your sister. You have a biological sister, and this is a cousin. And there's a difference between a cousin and a sister. A cousin and a brother. There's a big difference. Your cousin is not your mahram. While in some cultures, we treat them like mahram. We shake hands with them, we sit with them. They don't wear hijab, or you don't wear hijab from your male cousin. This is wrong, my dear friends. They say we grew up together. So what? You grew up together, you grew up together. It doesn't make your cousin your mahram. She still has to wear hijab from you. You have to wear hijab from him. This is God's law. This is a divine law. It precedes any cultural norm or habit. And some refuse to marry cousins. No, she's my cousin. How can I marry her? She's like my sister. She's like your sister. She's not your sister. You may marry her. For some, this is a taboo. Because in some cultures, here in America, for example, they don't marry cousins. They feel that it's a taboo. It's like marrying your sister. Well, this is a mistake. This is a mistake. In Islam, in most religions, divine religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you may marry a cousin. But some of our youth, they cross out this idea that this is my cousin. There's no way we could get married. It's like marrying my sister or marrying my brother. No, there's a difference. It's not like marrying your sister or your brother. That is culture, and this is religion. So we have to keep this in mind. 2, another cultural norm that conflicts with religion is interracial marriages. Interracial marriages. These marriages are not acceptable culturally. You find people, for example, from Lebanon, they only marry people from Lebanon. People from Iraq only marry people from Iraq. People from Pakistan only marry people from Pakistan, and so on and so forth. You marry from your own nationality and not else. This is a cultural norm, a cultural habit. And if someone were to marry from another race, another nationality, this would be looked down upon. You did not marry from your own people. You did not have a spouse. There were no girls in your community. There were no boys in your community. They shamed them. Why did you go outside of your culture? Why did you go outside of your nationality? What's wrong with this? Bring me a hadith or a verse that says you cannot marry from another nationality. Or you have to marry from your own nationality or your own race or your own tongue. Where? Where does this exist? It doesn't exist at all. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, when he was in Medina, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, he encouraged marriage between al-Muhajirin and Ansar. The Muhajirin were from Mecca. Many of them were from Quraysh. Al-Ansar were from Medina. Some of them were from Al-Aws, from Khazraj. 2 tribes, 2 different tribes. Some of them had feuds. There was fighting between them. Ya Rasulullah allowed them to marry. There's nothing wrong with interracial marriages. To stand against and to pressure your son or daughter to marry from your own nationality, this is un-Islamic. This is purely cultural. Here, culture conflicts with religion. Why? Why stand in the face of such a marriage? If the other side, if the other spouse is religious, they're Muslim, they're followers of Ahlul Bayt. Sometimes they're not from Ahlul Bayt, they're not from the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt, that's another story. But if they are followers of Ahlul Bayt, why stand in the face of this religion? Why? A Lebanese with a Pakistani with an Iraqi with an Iranian with an Afghan. What's wrong with this? As long as they're all followers of Ahlul Bayt. Number 3, another cultural norm or habit that conflicts with religion is the taboo of marrying someone older than you. A man that marries a wife older, this is a taboo. How can you marry someone who's older than you? This is unacceptable. The father stands against this, the mother stands against this, the entire tribe, if they hear that their son or a young man is marrying a wife older than him, everyone stands in his face. Why? Why? Is there a hadith or a verse that says your wife has to be younger than you? 10 years or 7 years or more or less younger than you? Where? Where does it say this? This is also unacceptable. A lot of times, young men and women were not able to marry because their parents stood in the way. Why? Because the wife is older than the husband. The girl is older than the man. What's the big deal? Didn't Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam marry a wife older than him? Khadija alayhi salam. Khadija was 3 years older than Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Rasulullah was 25, Khadija was 28, not 40. This is a myth. Khadija was not 40 years old. This was a Umayyad myth to make Khadija older and to make who younger? You already know. This was a myth. To make someone younger and someone else older. To make her an old lady, a widow, she had remarried, she had a previous husband, or she was divorced and she had children. This was a myth. Khadija was a virgin when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam married her, and she was only 3 years older than Rasulullah. So what's the problem of marrying someone older than you? Number 4, and this exists in most cultures and is accepted as a cultural norm. If you are a man, if you are a virgin, you've never been married before, you cannot marry a divorcee or a widow. You have to marry a virgin as well. If it's your first time getting married, make sure that you choose a wife that also has not been married before. Do not marry a divorcee. Do not marry a widow. Why? Why? They're not human beings? They're not humans? She's not a woman? Just because she's divorced, is there something wrong with her now? Is there a deformity in her? Or there's something wrong with her faith and akhlaq? What's wrong? We say this, but unfortunately, as a cultural norm, it's unacceptable to marry a divorcee. If you have not been married before, marry someone who has not been married before. Marry a virgin, but you marry a widow who has lost her husband, or she's divorced, she's been through a divorce. This is completely unacceptable. And again, from personal experience, I've seen several potential spouses that were about to marry, but the parents stood in the face of this marriage. Why? Because one of them is divorced. Either the man was divorced and it's his second marriage, and so the parents of the girl, they refuse, or the other way around, which is most likely the case, where the young man wishes to marry a religious female with great akhlaq, great faith, except she's divorced. She's divorced. It doesn't make her non-human. It doesn't make her not a Muslim. It doesn't make her not a Shi'i. It doesn't mean anything negative about her, but unfortunately, it's not acceptable to marry her. This is a cultural norm. And this directly conflicts with faith and religion. We believe that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, most of his wives were either widows or they were divorced. Rasulullah did not go shopping for virgins. Rasulullah was not looking out to marry virgins. No, most of his wives were either widows or they were divorced. So why does it come when the matter comes to us? We have to look for a virgin. A divorced lady or widow is completely out of the question. This is un-Islamic. Number 5, and the topic is on how we have certain cultural norms that contradict faith and religion or are incompatible with religion. We have ethnic-based mosques and masajid. I see across the US or Europe or even back home, there are some masajid that are purely for a certain ethnicity. Alhamdulillah, here you have several ethnicities that get together. But there are some mosques that are ethnic based. This is a Iraqi mosque, and that is a Pakistani mosque, and this is a Khoja mosque, and this is an Afghan mosque. And you are not made to feel welcome when you go to that mosque. Why? Why? Why do we have mosques that are based on ethnicity? Is this what religion calls for? Allah says, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. Our mosques belong to Allah. This is the house of Allah. The same way that in Mecca when you go, the Kaaba is the house of Allah. There you see tens of nationalities. Tens of nationalities. From Tanzania, from Africa, from Nigeria, from South America, from India, from Pakistan, from Europe, from America, from Canada, from everywhere. Every mosque is the house of Allah, and everyone should be made feel welcome in the house of Allah. But to have an ethnic-based masjid, an ethnic-based mosque, this mosque belongs to, for example, this ethnicity, and that mosque belongs to that ethnicity, and others are not made feel welcome. They're not made to feel welcome. This is un-Islamic. This is purely culture. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. We made you into men and women, or we created you from a man and a woman, and we made you into tribes and nations so that you may meet. لِتَعَارَفُوا. Get to know one another. Meet one another. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. Diversity works to our advantage. We run away from diversity. We want a masjid based solely on a specific ethnicity. No one else is welcome. Why? Meet people from other ethnicities, other nationalities, get to know one another, work together, cooperate with one another, understand each other. أَنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. The most honorable of you is the one who's most pious. Not based on color or language, but based on piety. Number 6, another problem that we have is expensive weddings and expensive dowries. This is purely cultural, my dear friends. This has nothing to do with faith and religion. I know several youth, many youth, that cannot get married because a wedding is too expensive. I tell them, why do you do an expensive wedding? Sayyid, we can't. What are we going to tell the people? What are we going to tell our friends? We have to rent a hall. We have to do this. We have to do that. Where does it say you have to? Where does it say you have to? And the dowries are very expensive. And hence, a lot of youth are pushing off marriage because of expensive weddings and expensive dowries. While we know that the wedding of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam was very, very simple. Everyone was invited. And the food was simple. One sheep was slaughtered, and there were dates, and there was milk or leban, and that's it. And it was enough for everyone. And her dowry was 500 dirhams. Simple wedding, simple marriage, simple dowry, but a blessed marriage. A marriage full of blessings. Why do we make it worse? for our youth. Today we are suffering economically. There's an inflation. We might be going into recession. We have a genius president who, is starting trade wars with our neighbors, and things economically could be becoming worse. And we are making it even more difficult for our youth to get married with expensive dowries and with expensive weddings. And this is purely cultural. Purely cultural. This has nothing to do with Islam. Number 7, treatment of women at our mosques and at our Islamic centers. Some of them are treated negatively. I go to some mosques, alhamdulillah, this doesn't apply here. I go to some mosques, there's a hall this big, 80% of the hall is for the men, and I bet 20% of the hall is for the women. And a lot of times, the women make up more of the attendance than the men. The women's side is more crowded than the men, but we give them 20% of the space. And we leave 80% of the space for the men. And guess where the children are going to play? On the women's side. We throw in the children also with them to go and play. Is this Islamic? That we give 20% or 30% of the space for the women and 70 or 80% of the space for the men. Is this Islamic or is this cultural? This is cultural. And the problem is when a foreigner comes to visit, imagine someone, Americans come to visit our center and they see this. Isn't this embarrassing? This is how we treat our women. We give them the smaller space, and where it's probably the place where the lights don't work and the microphone doesn't work. This is embarrassing. Why? These are our women. It's my mother and my wife and my daughter. Why don't we want them to sit in a place that is comfortable? And the same way that I want to listen to a lecture, they want to listen to a lecture as well. The same way that we want to benefit from the lecture, they need to benefit. Why? Because they are raising our children. If our women are not educated, that means our children are not educated. Because who imparts knowledge and education on our kids? Us? We're too busy with work. It's our women that spend most of the time, and they sacrifice their time with their children. My dear brothers and sisters, in the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, first of all, in Masjid al-Haram, you see there's no section for men and women. Everyone's together in Masjid al-Haram. Of course, this is a special law pertaining to Masjid al-Haram. And hence, if there's a woman praying before you and in front of you, you can still pray. This is a law specifically to Masjid al-Haram. As for al-Masjid al-Nabawi, there wasn't a special place for women. Men would pray in the front, women would be in the back. There was no wall, there was no curtain, there was no special ladies' side and a special men's side. It was all a common area for men and women in the masjid of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah was the head of the masjid, and he was the imam of the masjid. The men in front, the women in the back. Why do we mistreat our women in the mosques? Number 8, something that is very cultural, oppression of women. Oppression of women. We don't let them seek an education. This is cultural in some of our cultures, especially back home. Women are forbidden from education. Some of them are forbidden from inheritance. I've seen in some places where the father dies, he leaves sons and daughters. The sons take the money, not the daughters. Not the daughters. Especially if it's a piece of land, the land is divided between the sons, not the daughters. Why? Because they're afraid the daughters will marry and then they will bring their husbands into the father's land. And so a foreigner will come into that land. You see how they think? This sort of jahili sort of thinking. So they forbid them from education, from inheritance, sometimes from marriage. If she's divorced or she's a widow, she needs her father's husband to remarry, to marry. While Islam tells us the exact opposite. If someone is divorced, if a lady is divorced or is a widow, she does not need the father's permission. She may remarry. But in a lot of our cultures, no, she's forbidden from remarrying if she's a widow or she's divorced. This is purely cultural. This has nothing to do with Islam. Number 9, forced marriages. In some cultures, there's forced marriages. We force a young lady to marry her cousin, for example. or to marry from this tribe, or to marry from this family, and she has absolutely no say. The father forces her to marry. This is un-Islamic. In fact, this sort of marriage is invalid. It's invalid. If the wife has no say in the marriage, it's invalid, it's batil. She cannot be forced. She has the right. Of course, the father also has the right of veto, but she has to be asked. It has to be by her will. In some countries, a cousin can stop her from marriage. A brother can stop her. If the father is not there, the brother has the say. Can she marry or can she not marry? If the brother is not there, the cousin has a say in his female cousin's marriage. Do you see how ridiculous this is? This is in some cultures. Well, in Islam, it's the girl plus her father. The father has a say in it. Otherwise, no one else has a say. And the father cannot force his daughter into marriage. It has to be by her own will. Number 10, among the cultural habits that conflict with religion, favoring boys over girls. I see in a lot of families, when the wife is pregnant, they both, the husband, the wife, the relatives, the in-laws, they all pray, oh Allah, give us a boy, give us a boy. What's wrong with having a girl? What's wrong with having a girl? Do you think a boy is always better than a girl? Why? Why do we have this in our cultures that we wish to have a boy and not a girl? And if the wife gives birth to a daughter, we become upset. This is jahili. This is jahili culture. This is a jahili mentality. Exactly like the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Quran tells us that when one of them was told that you have a daughter, he'd be upset, he'd be depressed, he'd run away from the community. Why? Because shame has came to him. Why? Daughters are a blessing. Daughters are a blessing. They're a gift from Allah Azza wa Jal. Look at the children of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The progeny of Rasulullah. They came from whom? From a woman. Not from boys. Rasulullah did not have boys. Rasulullah had a daughter. Yeah, look at their progeny. Look at the Sayyids. Look at the progeny of Rasulullah. They all came from a daughter. Why do we favor boys over girls? And even when it comes to our children, those who have boys and daughters, the boys get away with everything, and we're more strict with the daughters. We're very strict with our daughters, but the boys get away with everything. We don't punish them. The girls get stronger punishments. Why? Why this double standard? They're both your children. They're both God's laws. If you are enforcing Islamic laws, enforce it on both the boy and the girl. Why are you more strict with the girl and less strict and more lenient with the boys? This is in our culture. This is embedded in some of our cultures. Number 11, domestic abuse. Domestic abuse. Abusing our children or abusing the wife. This is purely cultural. This has nothing to do with Islam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Imams never abused. They never physically abused a wife or a child. But this is embedded in our cultures. No, in our cultures, not just the parents that abuse, the teacher. They go to school, it's a norm for a teacher to slap, to do all kinds of things. And we let them get away with it because it's part of the culture. Number 12, blaming all of our misfortune on black magic, jinn, and the evil eye. You get in a car accident, there must be magic. You lose your business, there's an evil eye on you. There's any sort of misfortune between you and your wife, there's jinn involved. No. Of course, we believe in magic, we believe in jinn, and we believe in the evil eye. But these things sometimes are exaggerated. In our cultures, we exaggerate them. And finally, number 13, wearing black over the deceased. This is purely cultural, except for the Imams and Ahlul Bayt. Wearing black for the Imams and Ahlul Bayt, this is religious. This is a sign of mourning. وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ. We are honoring them. As for the deceased, in fact, it is makruh to wear black. Wearing black over the deceased, this is over a parent, a cousin, this is purely cultural. In fact, Islamically, it is discouraged to wear black, except for the Ahlul Bayt. If it's a sign of mourning and glorifying the Ahlul Bayt, then this is acceptable. It's time for iftar. I don't want to take more of your time. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم إني أسألك أن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر من الأمر المحتوم في الأمر الحكيم من القضاء الذي لا يرد ولا يبدل أن تكتبني من حجاج بيتك الحرام المبرور حجهم المشكور سعيهم المغفور ذنوبهم المكفر عنهم سيئاتهم، وأن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر أن تطيل عمري في خير وعافية وتوسع في رزقي وتجعلني ممن تنتصر به لدينك ولا تستبدل بي غيري. ولأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات الفاتحة مع الصلوات.